Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. Welcome to another episode of the Picard Deep Dive, where I take a look at the Easter eggs and canon connections from an episode of Star Trek Picard. This week, Season 3, Episode 6, The Bounty. Now, this is an episode that is just chock full of Easter eggs, so I feel like this is going to be a long one. Let's jump right into this and get right down to what I found this week. To start with, we have 3 starships who intercept a decoy beacon left by the Titan. The first that we see is the Duderstadt-class USS Trumbull. This is named after visual effects pioneer Douglas Trumbull, who worked on Star Trek The Motion Picture. We also have the Excelsior II class, the USS Mistral, named after a character in the Season 2 Enterprise episode Carbon Creek, a Vulcan who visited Earth in the 1950s and remained behind on an extended stay. And finally, the Echelon-class USS Yorktown. Yorktown has a long and storied name in the Star Trek universe and was actually going to be the name of the Enterprise before Enterprise was finally settled on. We'll see more Echelon-class starships later in the episode. Another ship that is, of course, chasing the Titan is the Shrike, under the command of the mysterious and villainous Vadic, who we have since learned is a changeling, as is her crew. Interestingly, she has one of her crew execute another member of the crew. If you'll recall back to Deep Space Nine, there was a big deal about no changeling ever having harmed another, with Odo supposedly being the first to do so. It seems that Vadic does not care, or something has fundamentally changed about these particular changelings. After Jack confided in his mother in the last episode about his violent outbursts and seemingly erratic behavior, we learn in this episode that that is apparently caused by a diagnosis of Irumodic syndrome. This was first named in the TNG final episode, All Good Things, as a malady that future Jean-Luc Picard suffered from due to a very small defect that Dr. Crusher found in his brain. Here we see Jack's brain scan and a similar defect. This links back to a clue that we've gotten in the closing credits in the past. Now, personally, I don't think Irumodic syndrome explains everything we've seen. I think there's something bigger going on. The changelings clearly want Jack for something, and I feel like Irumodic syndrome wouldn't make him super powerful and able to take on changelings. There's definitely something else going on here. Next, we have a scene between Jack Crusher and Picard on the holodeck in the 10 forward bar, discussing Jack's diagnosis of Irumodic syndrome. Jack asks Jean-Luc, "How did you survive it?" And he replies, "I didn't." Jack then remembers that Picard's body is not his original one and is in fact a synthetic body as per the events of the end of Star Trek Picard Season 1, where Irumodic syndrome was the malady that was killing Picard at the time. Picard managed to cheat death thanks to the golem body that he now inhabits. Worf is finally reunited in person with Picard, Riker, and Crusher, and of course, as has become common this season, the Klingon theme plays over his entrance. We also get the 7 of 9 and Raffi reunion, which unfortunately confirms that they have in fact ended their romantic relationship. When Raffi had mentioned this earlier in the season, I had hoped that this was just part of her deep cover. Unfortunately, it does seem to be reality. This scene also continues what I've seen as a bit of a running joke this season of Picard, where Worf calls Chateau Picard sour mead. It seems that a lot of people really don't like Chateau Picard, and this, like I say, has become a bit of a recurring joke throughout the season. In the observation lounge, the crew goes over what they know now and what they feel they have to do next. And this scene really felt like a classic TNG briefing scene that we would see in many episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. It really gave me a good feeling to see colleagues working together to solve a problem a la the best of Star Trek. Now, in this scene, they go over the end of the Dominion War and how that conflict ultimately ended, with the founders having been infected by a Starfleet-made virus. This was the virus created by Section 31, as revealed towards the end of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, in this briefing, Picard mentions that Starfleet delivered the cure to the Great Link, and this is not exactly accurate. It was not Starfleet that delivered the cure, but in fact Odo, who was not a member of Starfleet and was a member of the founder species himself. So it's kind of interesting that maybe the popular mythology around the end of the war is that Starfleet was on the side of the Angels eventually and delivered the cure, but that is not entirely true. The Titan travels to Daystrom Station in an attempt to learn what it was the changelings stole from there, and unfortunately Starfleet catches up with them, with 2 Echelon-class starships intercepting them at the station. Now, these starships are an interesting design. They almost look like the Sagan-class Stargazer, just kind of cut in half, but they also really remind me of the Texas-class starships from the final episode of Lower Decks Season 3. These were automated starships run by a sophisticated AI. There's no indication in this episode that that's the case. In fact, later we hear radio voices implying that they do in fact have a crew, as any normal starship would, but I found that similarity a little bit off-putting for sure. Now, these 2 starships have interesting names as well. We learn that one is called the USS Sternbach. This is obviously named after Rick Sternbach, a designer and behind-the-scenes artist for various Star Trek series, including Picard. And the other starship is the USS Cole, which, given the number of other references throughout the season, I have to assume is a reference to the 12 Monkeys character James Cole. Riker, Worf, and Raffi beam aboard Daystrom Station, and it's here that we get a ton of Easter eggs as far as what is being held on the station. First of all, Worf and Riker both mention Section 31, which is the ultra-secret, supposedly, arm of Starfleet that does black ops and morally questionable activities, first introduced in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, on the station, some of these Easter eggs are wild. We have the apparent remains of James T. Kirk, supposedly recovered from Veridian 3 after the end of Star Trek Generations. We have this, which is labeled the Genesis 2 device. The Genesis device was, of course, a big feature of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. We also see a genetically modified Tribble. I'm assuming this is not how these creatures usually look on the underside, and it appropriately hates Worf as a Klingon. We see a Thaleron weapon similar to the one incorporated into the Scimitar, Shinzon's ship in Star Trek Nemesis. We see a Borg vinculum, which was first seen in the Voyager episode Infinite Regress. This apparently contains one of the android bodies that was constructed by the Enterprise crew for Sargon's people in the TOS episode Return to Tomorrow. Chillingly, this one contains the remains of the Borg Queen. I'm assuming Section 31 acquired this after the events of Star Trek First Contact. We see a D'Orsay archive, which was the main cause of the calamitous events of the TNG Season 7 episode Masks, as well as causing mayhem aboard the USS Cerritos in Star Trek Lower Decks. This one apparently contains a probability device as seen in the Deep Space Nine episode Rivals. This device could alter the laws of probability depending on if the person holding the device was winning or losing while playing with it. This one apparently contains self-sealing stem bolts. Not sure what the super secret thing behind them is, but I appreciate the inside joke. Now, all of the ones that I just mentioned were in some way visible on screen. There are a number of others that we got from behind the scenes information about the episode, which I don't think were visible in the episode. At least I was unable to find them, nor have I seen anyone online showing them. But apparently there is the Catan probe, the probe that causes Jean-Luc to experience the life of Cayman in the TNG Season 5 episode The Inner Light. The Pup probe that showed up at Deep Space Nine from the Gamma Quadrant in the Season 1 DS9 episode The Forsaken. The remains of a Sporocystian life form, which I assume to be the remains of the Caretaker that Janeway came into possession of at the end of the Voyager pilot episode, Caretaker. And apparently the archive also contains the M5 computer, the disastrous artificial intelligence that took over the Enterprise and caused the deaths of many Starfleet officers in the original series episode, The Ultimate Computer. The AI that runs Daystrom Station analyzes the voice prints of the intruders and recognizes William T. Riker, and we see his file briefly flash on the screen. The picture of Riker is a publicity photo from Star Trek Nemesis, and we also learn from this the canon name of Riker's mother is Betty C. Riker. The boarding party is met with a holographic crow, and this would seem to link to the TNG episode Birthright Part 1, in which we see Data's dream program activated, and the crow was something that he dreamt of quite a bit in that episode. Shortly thereafter, the away team is met by Moriarty. This, of course, is the nemesis of Data as Sherlock Holmes, seen in 2 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, Elementary Dear Data and Ship in a Bottle. However, this Moriarty does not seem to be the original hyper-intelligent one that was designed to defeat Data, as Riker mentions in this episode, but rather just a simulacrum. Back on the Titan, we get the arrival of the ship at Athen Prime and the Fleet Museum, home of Geordi LaForge. Now, there are a ton of Easter eggs as far as the ships that inhabit the Fleet Museum here, a number of which are featured very prominently on screen, and many of which are just in the background. First of all, very prominently featured, we get the USS Defiant NX-74205. Now, this is not, of course, the original Defiant assigned to Deep Space Nine. That ship was destroyed in the Deep Space Nine episode The Changing Face of Evil and was replaced by a new starship, the USS Sao Paulo, which was renamed Defiant. So this would be that vessel that we see in the closing episodes of Deep Space Nine. We also get the Constitution-class USS New Jersey. This, interestingly, is a classic Constitution class, very similar to the Enterprise as seen in Star Trek the original series, and not the redesigned version from Discovery and Strange New Worlds that we see in those shows, as well as that we saw at Starfleet headquarters in season 1 of Picard. So very cool that that is acknowledged as a canon design, and one that the Enterprise that's currently in Strange New Worlds will eventually come to look like, presumably. The starship name and registry, USS New Jersey NCC 1975, refers to the birthplace of showrunner Terry Matalas, who was born in New Jersey in 1975. Next, we get the USS Enterprise NCC 1701A, as seen in the films Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, Star Trek V The Final Frontier, and Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country. This, of course, was Captain James T. Kirk's ship after he was demoted from the rank of Admiral in Star Trek IV. And personally, my favorite design of Starship in all of Star Trek history. So wonderful to see it on screen again, finally, after all these years. We get a touching moment where 7 of 9 displays the USS Voyager on screen, NCC 74656, the titular starship from Star Trek Voyager, and of course the home of 7 of 9 for a few years after being rescued from the Borg by the crew of Voyager and returning home to Earth. Lovely moment here, and I love also that the theme for Voyager plays under the shot of the ship. And that goes double for the other ships that we see too. We get the Deep Space Nine theme under the shot of the Defiant, the TOS theme under the shot of the Enterprise A, and the Star Trek IV The Voyage Home theme under the shot of the next ship, the HMS Bounty, the Klingon bird of prey that Kirk and company used to go back in time to rescue the whales in Star Trek IV The Voyage Home after acquiring the vessel from Commander Krug in Star Trek III The Search for Spock. Now, of course, this ship will play a larger role later in the episode, but we'll get to that shortly. Also seen around the museum are a number of other starships. The USS Stargazer, I'm assuming this is the Stargazer, it's a Constellation-class starship. Picard and the crew of the Enterprise gained custody of it in the Season 1 episode The Battle. We see the USS Excelsior, first introduced in Star Trek III The Search for Spock, with a prominent role in Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country under the command of Captain Sulu. We see an Akira-class starship, a Nebula-class starship, Miranda and Saber-class starships, as well as a Romulan bird of prey, the TOS style, first seen in the Season 1 TOS episode Balance of Terror. We see this Klingon ship, which many online believe to be, and I agree, to be Kronos 1, the Klingon Chancellor's ship from Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country. And most thrillingly, we see the NX-01 refit. This is a design of the NX-01 Enterprise from the series Star Trek Enterprise. It was redesigned by Doug Drexler as a possible appearance of the ship had the series continued on and the ship continued to be refit and evolve. This is really exciting because even though the ship design was made canon in a previous season thanks to an Eagle Moss model that can be seen on screen, this is the first time that the ship itself is on screen for us to see, and it is a sight to behold. I love it. It's beautiful. Very nicely done. I wish we got a little bit more of a focus on it, but even just the fact that it's there is absolutely thrilling. As I mentioned earlier, Geordi LaForge is in charge of the Fleet Museum, and we of course get the return of LeVar Burton as Geordi LaForge, the latest TNG cast member to join Star Trek Picard. Very happy to see him. We also get Micah Burton as his daughter, Alandra LaForge. If you follow her on social media, you know she's absolutely thrilled to be on Star Trek, and LeVar Burton is so happy to be acting beside his daughter in Star Trek. It's really, really nice to see. The name Alandra, of course, comes from All Good Things, where Picard and Geordi talk about Geordi's kids. We also get a view of Geordi's office, and there are a number of Easter eggs here that aren't actually visible on screen. A few of them are, but there are a lot more there that are visible in behind-the-scenes photos, specifically one that was released prior to the episode coming out. We have a United Federation of Planets flag, first seen in the TOS episode And the Children Shall Lead. We have a Zephram Cochrane statue, which is not the same, but is similar to a statue of Zephram Cochrane that Archer had in his quarters aboard the NX-01. We have this model that I at first thought was the USS Excelsior, but behind the scenes photos confirm it to actually be probably the Enterprise B, that Excelsior upgraded class that we see in Generations. We have this model of the Enterprise C, or at least an Ambassador class starship. This model here, which is actually the Vulcan shuttle from Star Trek the Motion Picture, a model of the Phoenix, Zephram Cochrane's ship, and this book here, which apparently is the copy of A Tale of Two Cities that was given to Kirk by Spock in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Back on Daystrom Station, Riker and the rest of the boarding party are dealing with Moriarty, while at the same time some various musical notes are being played. Riker eventually recognizes it as Pop Goes the Weasel, and we get some archive footage from Encounter at Farpoint, the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. And as Data says, it is indeed marvelous. This also relates back to the closing credits. We see musical notes comprising Pop Goes the Weasel. That gets paid off here. Once Riker, Worf, and Raffi gain access to the central control room, they discover that the AI that controls Daystrom Station is apparently Data, or at least what is referred to as Daystrom Android M510. Now, M5, I'm assuming, is a reference to the M5 computer, the AI from the original appearance of Richard Daystrom, the Ultimate Computer. And it turns out that this android contains the essences of not just Data, but Lore, B4, Altan Sung, and Lal. So Lore is Data's quote-unquote evil brother who was first introduced in the Season 1 TNG episode Data Lore. B4 was a prototype for Data and Lore, who we first met in Star Trek Nemesis, and Lal was Data's first daughter, the daughter that he constructed in the TNG Season 3 episode, The Offspring. Lovely reference here. I'm really glad to have that acknowledgement of Lal after so many in Season 1 complained that she was never mentioned. Raffi mentions that Data died twice, and that is true. We first saw him die in Star Trek Nemesis, and then his consciousness died again at the end of Star Trek Picard Season 1. We learn how he's resurrected here in that his backup that he installed into B4 in Star Trek Nemesis was accessed here and put into this synthetic android body. Altan Sung is the source of this exposition, and we see him in a recording. We first met him in Picard Season 1 as well, and it seems that he has since passed away. I want to make a quick comment about this scene between Shaw and Geordi LaForge. This may be my new favorite Captain Shaw scene, which is really saying something. He absolutely geeks out over meeting Geordi LaForge. This makes sense given his past as an engineer, and I love their little back and forth and Shaw's, yeah, it's been a weird week. Great stuff here. I love this scene. It is interrupted, however, by the activation of the cloaking device from the HMS Bounty that Jack and the LaForge daughters have apparently pilfered from the Bounty and installed on the Titan. Geordi's anger towards Picard and his possessiveness of his bird of prey was so great in this scene. I love this. But I also just love the idea of using this piece of canon Star Trek history in this way. The cloaking device from the Bounty, the fact that they use that to be able to get back to Daystrom Station undetected. Beautiful. I absolutely love this bit of the story. And this, of course, links back once again to the closing credits, where a Klingon cloaking device has been there since episode 1. Riker is unfortunately captured, but the rest of the away team beams back to Titan, along with Daystrom android M510, aka Data ? And we get this scene of Geordi working on Data to reactivate him, and it really reminded me of all those scenes we get in TNG of Geordi working on Data, and again, just twinged that bit of nostalgia for me. Geordi reactivates the android, and the dominant personality to begin with is Data, and we get this lovely Data and Geordi reunion, which definitely got me right in the feels. So it turns out that what was stolen by the changelings from Daystrom Station was the remains of Jean-Luc Picard, his actual human body that Section 31 is apparently in possession of after Picard died at the end of Season 1. So what they have planned with it is anyone's guess. There are a few good theories out there that I won't go into here, but suffice it to say this adds a very interesting wrinkle to the story. Now, we do get one final scene tagged onto the end of this episode, with Riker having been captured by, it turns out, Vadic, in one of the best villain reveals ever. This burly Starfleet officer changes form into Vadic, and she is typically creepy. And it seems that they have in their possession Deanna Troi, presumably to be able to coerce Riker into giving up his former crewmates and friends. So not a good place that this is headed, I would think. But we will have to wait another week to find out what happens. Well, those were all of the Easter eggs and canon connections that I was able to find. I'm sure I missed a few there. Let me know in the comments below what I missed. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you to everyone for watching, and thanks especially, of course, to the Patreon supporters. I truly do appreciate it and could not do it without you. To everyone else, again, thank you so much for watching. It really is the best thing you can do to help the channel. Just 4 episodes left now, so I'm really excited to see where all of this goes. Do you have any theories as to what's going on? What's up with Jack Crusher? I don't think it's just Irumodic syndrome. I think there's something else going on there. But yeah, let me know in the comments below your thoughts and theories, and I will see you next week for the next episode titled Dominion. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.